Chess is a game that triggers a lot of emotions, be it happiness, sadness, anger, maybe even envy. But in this game, every single emotion was experienced. I began by playing the Sveshnikov like Magnus Carlsen himself, going on a crazy attack on the king side, but then shockingly losing all of my advantage and the game in an absolutely crushing way. But it's a very exciting game with a lot of things to learn from and also some great play for myself. In fact, I played extremely well. I'm happy with how I played in the game apart from the end, and the way I lost is just something you're going to have to see for yourself. So in this game, I had the black pieces. This was an over-the-board tournament played in Italy. This was FIDE rated and it was also a classical game. So we both had a lot of time to think, so the play will be quite high rated. As you can see, me and my opponent are rated quite similarly, both 1600 FIDE. We see the Sicilian defense on the board. This is my main opening. She goes knight to f3, I go knight to c6, and now we're hoping for an open Sicilian. This is one of the most challenging variations for both sides to play, resulting in extremely dynamic play in all of the variations. So I capture in the center. White basically tries to open the center and enter a tactical nuanced game. I go knight to f6, just developing a piece. My opponent goes knight to c3, defending the e-pawn that was attacked. Here I go e5, lashing out in the center of the board, entering the complicated and almost theoretical battleground that is the Sveshnikov Sicilian. Now, I've been studying this opening for a year. I played it last time in the tournament, winning my only game, but I hadn't been performing so well on it, so I was looking to get my first win from this variation. I go d6, this is the main move, stopping any knight jumps into d6 because you're really annoying, and my opponent goes bishop to g5, pinning my knight, but this move has actually a very strategic idea. The idea of this move is to gain control of the critical d5 square. Now in gaining control of the center and winning time on white's knight, I actually weaken my central squares quite significantly, and we're definitely going to see that in this game. A typical idea here has been played by many players, including Kamsky himself, a very positional player, and many others. And of course the idea is to trade off this knight and land that good knight on d5 where it can basically control a lot of key squares in my position. So we see a6, I kick the knight away, the knight moves back to a pretty awful square on a2. This is quite a feature of the Sveshnikov. If players don't know how to deal with this, that knight is going to be languishing on the edge of the board in absolutely Siberia for the rest of the game. So the opponent definitely needs to play carefully here, and I follow up with b5, basically threatening to fork the two ponies, and one jumps into the middle, as is the main line. So I don't know if my opponent had studied this or if she was just very positionally strong, but she has played all the best moves so far. This is one of the main lines of the Sveshnikov. And after bishop to e7, unpinning, because of course threatening to take and take with some threats, and doubling my pawns most likely. Don't want to allow that. And now we're at a major crossroads. The main moves here are c3 and c4. My opponent goes for a bit of a sideline, not a bad move by any respect, but first she has to capture on f6, which is her main idea. So takes, and then bishop to e2. Here's a little bit of a sideline. Normally some sort of c-pawn move is required to get this knight back into the game, and also maybe try and do some damage on black's queen side. So I decide to just castle, getting my king out of the center. She castles, and now bishop to g5. This is normally a key move in the Sveshnikov, a classic move. And the idea is, well, the bishop just isn't doing anything on f6. It's not seeing any key squares. It's just a target, maybe to get captured by this knight if this queen wants to foray onto the queen side. So moving the bishop avoids that, which is sort of the minor idea, but the main idea is just to control some nice dark squares and improve that piece. This also frees up the f-pawn for mobility, which is a very key idea as well, trying to get counterplay, because otherwise, as black, you're just going to get positionally squashed, because this is a great piece. Queen to d3 played, not a move I particularly like from my opponent. It doesn't really do anything meaningful. Of course, it connects the rooks, which you're taught to do, and you can't go to this comfortable d2 square, because that is controlled by the bishop, but there's just better things to be done here, probably a c-pawn move, as I discussed earlier. So I waste no time, I immediately lash out in the center with this move f5. And white is at a bit of a crossroads here again. They don't really want to take the pawn because the bishop is just going to develop some tempo on the queen, and I'm going to have the half-open f-file to just do some damage with. So instead she decides to just play this calm move f3, which is quite logical if you think about it. Maybe if you're a d4 player, you might know about the king is Indian, or similar positions where the f-pawn starts lurching forward, you go f3 to try and stem the bleeding and stop that from really coming into your king side and opening things up too much. But the thing is, she has opened this long diagonal, this a7 to g1 diagonal can become weak, and that is a factor which I will exploit later in the game. So I play bishop to e6, maybe trying to trade off this knight and also just getting another piece into the game. Now c4 played, finally one of these pawn moves, and here I played a little bit inaccurately. I was meant to just jump my knight into the center of the board, but I kind of had seen this similar pattern before and played a plan. Not a bad move by any respects, but I play b5, keeping the tension. The knight moves away and I follow up defending my pawn, making sure there's no threats on that side of the board. Here my opponent just goes rook a d1, bringing a rook into the game. But here we see a classic idea in the Sveshnikov. I've weakened this square, so you either want to put a knight on that square or attack the backwards d6 pawn. Either plan is good, but the problem is you just can't do both at the same time. She has a knight on d5, but she can't put pressure on d6 pawn. So what do? Move the knight back. It doesn't look great. You can't even go back to this side of the board. So she decides to go, after I go knight to e7, trading off the knight, she decides to go knight to e3. But now I have a tempo move. I'd expand on the king side. Now the battle lines are drawn. I'm going to attack on the king side, and she's going to try and attack on the queen side and try and do some damage there. But the knight has to go back first order of business. Now I trade off that strong knight. She has a nice pawn chain, but the bishop just comes back. It's no worries. Now the rook moves back. He sort of admits to the tempo loss here because now with the open c-file, now she wants to infiltrate and try and attack my queenside that way. Of course, my king's a bit open too. The rook comes in, things could be getting a little bit nasty, but the pawn structure is quite close, so I've got time to maneuver, and maneuver I do. Queen to e8. A weird looking move, I'll admit. But if you know these positions, I was looking at quite a lot of Magnus games. He likes to play this opening. He played it in the World Championship. I noticed he was always doing these weird little queen moves. I mean, what's the idea here? Well, classic in the Grand Prix attack, or most positions where the f-pawn is moved, I'm trying to swing my queen over to the queen side, the king side, and activate it that way. So moving the queen one square, but to open up its scope significantly, because it's not doing anything on d8. She goes queen to d2. Not too sure of the idea of this move, but it doesn't really worsen her position. It's just maybe a little bit of a waste of time. And here I find another great move. This is quite obscure. If you're trying to look at this position, trying to find the best move, if you know the idea, you're going to find it easily. Or if you're a great positional player, you'll also find the move. But I was very aware of this idea, but it's all about finding the right time to apply these ideas. Bishop back to d8. Now what am I doing retreating a piece? Well, the idea is just to get on this juicy diagonal. Again, this bishop must be improved. It's blocked by a pawn yet again. It's moving again in the game, but this time it's an absolutely beautiful diagonal over here, putting some pressure on the king and forcing him onto the h-file, most likely. So knight back to e1, just opening up that rook and opening up the scope. The knight's probably going to come back in here, but as we can already see, white is lacking play in this position, and my kingside attack is building. I move the bishop with check, the king just slides over. Now again, I play the best move, bringing more pieces into the game and into the attack, using the way my pawns are pointing because I have more space on the king side. So rook to f6. The rook lived. Now this king is feeling a bit of heat. My opponent plays rook to c2, maybe trying to double the rooks, also lending some key support to that's second rank. So when I'm putting pressure on that king, maybe she can move the bishop back and try and defend that way. So I go rook to h6, and here my opponent blunders significantly with the move bishop to d3. This move doesn't do too much, and in fact, actually worsens her position a little bit. And not only worsens her position, this move actually leads to checkmate in two moves. I can sacrifice the rook. Rook takes h2, the king moves up, and now I have queen to h5 checkmate. Because the pawn covers this square and the bishop cuts off the escape, that is just mate on the board. But the problem was, I was playing all of this on instinct. I was very nervous because I knew I was winning. I knew I'd played such a great game up to this point. And I'd seen this whole plan of moving the queen over many moves before, and I hadn't calculated it accurately. I wasn't looking for my opponent's moves. I wasn't looking for any concrete ways to continue my attack, which of course I should have been. Always look for checks and captures, and that was both. Instead, I decided to play the move queen to h5, which is still winning. Don't get me wrong, still winning. And the sequence I had calculated was after h3, the only real defensive move, maybe g4, but I can obviously en passant that. It looks very nasty. Now I'd seen I can sacrifice the bishop. Bishop takes h3. The pawn is forced to recapture, otherwise what else are you really doing? The queen takes, and of course you can block, but there's a rook here. I move away, and the queen is simply pinned. So I pin the queen, she just captures. I capture back, but I'd missed a key detail. My opponent plays the move, rook to g2, and I had missed that my king was on the diagonal, and it was going to open up, and my queen was liable to being pinned, and I'd sacrificed a piece to get in this position. Now I'm just down the piece that I've sacrificed. I'm going to lose the queen right back. So my position is almost completely lost. I believe the engine finds kind of a weird way to continue with like queen to g5, and because the structure is kind of weird, it finds a way to maybe hold, but I'm going to be honest, that's 36 ounces level play. A player at my level was not able to find that, and in fact I just moved the king away, lost the queen, captured back, and just resigned the game, looking that I was down a piece. I had a piece for 2 pawns, but this pawn is going to be lost, and one of these probably shortly after, so I decided to resign the game here, seeing no winning chances for me. So yeah, that shows how brutal the game can be one time you're absolutely winning, you're crushing, but you miss a tiny detail and that's it, that's how the game can end. So an absolutely brutal loss from me, probably the worst of my entire chess career, but I'm excited to share because you can't only show the good. Also, you got to show bad moments like this, and every bad game in chess is something to learn from. So hopefully you guys learned something from this video, not playing moves too quickly, looking for alternatives, always looking for checks, and also this maneuver, something Daniel King likes to call the bad bishop bounce. Bouncing that bishop off the back of the board, the pool shot, to get dynamic attacking chances on my opponent's position. That's all for today's video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.